Well, hello and welcome to the 2023 Queens District Attorney Debate hosted by Schneps Media and Politics NY. My name's Christian Murray, co-founder of the Queens Post and digital editor at AM New York. This year's primary is scheduled for June 27, with early voting happening already. Tonight, we have two of the three candidates seeking the Democratic nomination for the Queens DA seat. The current District Attorney Melinda Katz is unable to join us tonight's debate due to a reported scheduling conflict. The other two candidates are George Grasso and Devian Daniels, who are joining us tonight. Also joining us is Serena Andres, who co-founded the Queens Post with me and is the publisher of the Queens Post sites and Borough magazine. And Serena's going to go through tonight's format and the rules. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian, and welcome everyone. Tonight's debate will include two rounds, with the first round being questions that we've prepared, and then a second round with questions coming from the audience. So to all of tonight's viewers, if you have a question you would like to ask the candidates, please submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. The questions received will be screened and those selected will be put out to the candidates. So now let's go to opening statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes for their opening statement to introduce themselves. Devian, we will start with you.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming to the debate and for having me. My name is Devian Daniels, and I've been a lawyer here in Queens County for almost 17 years. And I'm running to be the Queens DA because there are many inequities in the criminal justice system in Queens. It affects populations of minority the most. And I'm running because I believe that as a DA, I can work towards reducing those biases. We can end mass incarceration, and we can make Queens a safe place for everyone. It's really important that we address these issues because it's costing taxpayers a lot of money for the situation to continue as it is. And what I mean by that is, in 2021, Scott Stringer reported that it costs $559,000 per year to keep someone in prison at Rikers Island for 1 year. And it costs New York State taxpayers $115,000 per year to keep someone in prison in upstate New York for 1 year. Those numbers are astronomical. As a society, we cannot continue to fund that. And as a society, I believe that we want to spend our money doing more purposeful things that build society. And as the DA, I want to work towards ending mass incarceration, reducing the biases in court, and also making sure that people in Queens are safe. And at the end of this debate, I will urge all Democratic voters to join me on June 27th or an early voting date coming up this week and vote for Daniels for DA. Thank you.
Thank you. And George?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank Schneps Media for this wonderful opportunity to debate crucial issues to our county. And I will state for the record that I believe that it isn't that the current DA, Melinda Katz, is unable to be here. She could certainly be here if she wanted to. I believe she's unwilling to be here. And in my opinion, not being here as part of this process with me and Devian, she's disrespecting all of Queens County. I'm in my 44th year as a criminal justice professional. I started as a foot cop in Southeast Queens, walking the streets of Merrick Boulevard, Jamaica Avenue, Parsons Boulevard, and Sutphin Boulevard back in 1980 at the age of 22. I worked my way up through every rank in the NYPD, becoming the first deputy police commissioner for Raymond Kelly between 2002 and 2010. By the way, the highest rank ever held by an Italian American in the history of the NYPD. I then went on to become a judge. I was appointed by Mayor Bloomberg in 2010 after 30 years of service in the police department. And I had a wonderful judicial career. I started in Kings County Criminal Court And after 2 years, I was promoted by the administrative judge, Barry Cammons, to be the supervising judge of citywide arraignments. And I dramatically reduced arrest to arraignment times from over 30 hours to under 20 hours. I then went on to Bronx Criminal Court, where I was the supervising judge in Bronx Criminal Court. I reduced crushing backlogs of misdemeanor cases from over a couple of thousand to under 200 in the matter of several years. And I created a court known as OAR, Overdose Avoidance and Recovery Court, dealing with the needs of individuals facing possible death with serious substance use issues and off-ramping them from Rikers Island and into life-saving treatments. I also created many youth programs such as Project Reset and DATY in the criminal court. I became the administrative judge in Queens Supreme Court in 2021. I was able to get the system going again, where we would go months, where we had 1 or 2 jury trials a month. After I took over, in a matter of several months, I had 10 jury trials going in a day. And I created a very substantial court called the Queens Diversion Part, for individuals who were charged, young people between 18 and 24 who were charged with gun possession, and offered them an opportunity to get their lives back on track if they filed criteria of the court. And I oversaw a citywide reduction in pending gun cases from over 2,000 to under 1,000. I left the administrative judge position August 31st of 2022 to run for district attorney, because I believe we have a public safety crisis in Queens County that is not adequately being addressed by the current district attorney. And as a judge, I concluded I could not address this crisis head on. So that's why I resigned from my judicial position. I created my committee, Grasso for Queens. That's why I'm running for district attorney, and that's why I'm proud to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, George. And thank you again, Devian. Now we have to move on to the first round of questions, which Christian and I will ask of the candidates. In this round, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for their answer, and then Devian or George will each have 1 minute to provide a rebuttal if needed. So candidates, I will be keeping track of your time as we go. You will hear a sound when your time is up. Please raise your hand if you have a rebuttal so we may call on you. We will take turns in terms of who answers first. Devian will start with the first question and then George with the second question. So Christian?
Thank you, Serena. Devian, let me know if you need me to repeat the question too. 4 years ago, the state eliminated cash bail for most misdemeanors and non-violent felonies, arguing that no one should be held due to a lack of money. The state has made some adjustments since, such as expanding the list of bail-eligible crimes and providing judges with some discretion to detain dangerous defendants. What is your view on bail reform, and are further changes needed?
Thank you. Well, I believe that being poor should not be a crime. And I also believe that being poor should not be the reason why somebody is not out, does not have their liberty. And what I mean by that is that, as many Queens residents may recall, just a year ago, there was a fellow who chased after a Chinese food delivery person and shot the person and killed the person. And then a judge gave them bail of $500,000. And that person was able to pay the bail. However, I don't believe that we were safe just because that person paid the bail. And I think that, you know, if somebody can afford to pay bail, it doesn't mean that we're a safer society. New York is historical for having a history of only asking for bail in cases where people are, to determine whether or not people are willing to come back to court. And I think that that's a really important function of bail. And I think that we should continue to use that standard.
Okay, thank you, Devian. George, over to you.
Yes, well, I think that so-called 2019 so-called criminal justice reform, aka bail reform, as well as discovery reform, which I imagine we'll talk about later, has been a complete and utter disaster. I will point out, though, Devian just said something that I definitely agree with. I think that the concept that this individual that she referred to, and I'm familiar with the case she's talking about, I think it was commonly known as the duck sauce case, where an individual shot and killed said to say a delivery man from a Chinese restaurant, allegedly because something about duck sauce. I believe that judges need to clearly have the authority to remand individuals who they deem to be dangerous. And I believe that the safeguards built into the process should be, if I as a judge, and I've done thousands of arraignments in criminal court, make that determination based upon the nature of the case, the history of the individual involved, I should have to make a clear record, public record, and stating my reasons with legal aid, the defense attorney able to be heard, and obviously the DA able to be heard. Also, I believe, given the significance of remand and what it means sending someone to jail on Rikers Island with a remand, I understand how serious that is. We could build in, and we should build into the process, a next business day habeas corpus review to an appellate term judge. It's assigned to Supreme Court over the arraignment judge. So the defense could go right back in next business day and try and convince an appellate judge as to why I might have, if I was the arraignment judge, I might have overstepped my discretion. If we do it that way, we're protecting the public and we have a sound legal process. What the legislature did in taking all of these different crimes from different assaults, beef felony drug sales, for example, things like that, burglaries, and the whole plethora of additional crimes, and saying no bail, no jail, regardless of recidivism, regardless of the dangerousness of the individual, regardless of whether or not the person comes to court, has undermined the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. And I think that it should be repealed immediately, and we need to start over again.
All right. Thank you, George.
Okay, for this next question, George, we will have you answer first. Do you think Rikers Island should still be closed given that jail population is approaching 6,000? The jail population is far higher than the 3,300 inmates that can be housed in borough-based jails when they are complete.
That's a great question, and I've spoken out publicly many times on this. This is another legislative created disaster. You know, part of my premises for running for DA is I believe all of New York City, including Queens, is in the middle of a politically driven crime wave. That's part of the problem. The so-called closed Rikers bill was a dishonest bill, in my opinion. It was defective from day one. When the city council under Corey Johnson made a deal with Mayor de Blasio, where they came up with a head count of 3,300 at that time, it wasn't based on any real data. It was based on a dishonest budget compromise. It wasn't based on any realistic plan to get the head count down to that number. So where are we now? We are rising. The jail population is rising, I think in part because of the defects of the so-called bail reform and discovery reform issues that we got from the state legislature. We now have over 6,000 population and growing on Rikers. So that means if every borough-based jail was available tomorrow, which obviously it's not, and that's behind schedule in many respects, but let's say it was available, we would still need Rikers for at least half the population. This isn't going to change. The problem is only going to get worse. So what we need is for our government leaders, the mayor, the city council, the speaker of the city council, to own up to the reality that Rikers is not closing in 2027 or anytime soon. And what they need to do is they need to budget the money as soon as possible into Rikers Island to create humane conditions for both inmates and corrections officers. Furthermore, tied into this, I believe, based on everything I know, that it's time for the federal judge overseeing the Rikers case to put Rikers into receivership and have a federal takeover. And that, I think, will also speed the way to getting the resources into Rikers. And city council and the mayor go back to the drawing board. If they really want to close Rikers, come up with a realistic budget and a realistic head count. Those are my views.
Thank you, George. Devian?
Thank you. Well, as the DA, I do not see myself as a buildings administrator or a facilities administrator for Rikers Island. But what I would say is that whether people are being detained at Rikers Island or somewhere else, it's really important that, first of all, spending $559,000 per year is too much money. That's almost $50,000 or $60,000 per month. That's too much money. We don't have it to spend it. In addition, what I think is important, regardless of where people are held, they need to be safe. Their civil rights should be protected. And when people are suffering from mental health issues or substance abuse issues, they need to get treatment and programs that address those issues. Because whether they're at Rikers Island for 1 day or 1 week or 1 month or 1 year, whatever their jail time is, if we do not address their underlying issues, I believe that we will see a cycle where they'll come back into prison for other reasons as well. So I believe that no matter where people are held, whether it's Rikers Island or somewhere else, we need proper programming, and we also need to make sure that the inmates are safe, and also the correctional officers are also safe.
Well, thank you, Devian. The next question is for you. There has been a spate of gun violence since the end of the pandemic. How would you tackle this as the district attorney?
Thank you. Well, with respect to gun violence, I believe that we should do a lot of investigations to figure out who is trafficking guns into Queens. There are no factories in Queens that build guns. They come from up the iron pipeline. And I think it's really important to, coordinate with the feds and other partners to figure out who is trafficking guns into Queens and address those issues. In addition, we need to also address people who manufacture ghost guns or who buy materials to make ghost guns. I think that that's really important. In addition, I think that anybody who uses guns to be violent towards another person should be prosecuted, and crimes like that should earn you jail time if you hurt someone else with a gun in Queens.
Thank you, Devian. George?
I think as district attorney, what we have to focus on is a clear ability to prosecute any case involving gun possession, violent gun possession, in a very timely fashion. And to prosecute them effectively. One of the major deficiencies in the Queens District Attorney's Office now is that for the last calendar year that I'm aware there's good DCJS data for, in 2021, there was only a 5% felony conviction rate in Queens County, assessing the felony conviction from the time the case was arraigned as a felony until the time that the case was ultimately concluded. That means large swaths of those cases, including gun cases, end up being either dismissed, pled down to misdemeanors, or violations. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable across the board, but especially with gun cases, because we need to get the word out on the street. If you're caught with a gun, arresting, Melinda Katz likes to talk about, we're prosecuting thousands and thousands of gun cases. Great. Show me the beef. Where are the felony convictions and how timely is it? That's crucial. That's critical. And that's something that I'm going to focus on. Expeditiously moving on gun cases and expeditious accountability, and where appropriate, significant jail time.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have you answer this first too. The next question is, in light of rising crime rates in Queens, how will you implement an effective enforcement strategy that focuses on quality of life offenses and what measures will be taken to specifically address repeat offenders? George?
So another great question. So I would refer anybody watching this particular debate to go straight to my website, grassoforqueens.com, hit platforms, and you're going to see, and they will see quality of life come right up. I have spent a lot of time, as a matter of fact, with quality, enhancing quality of life enforcement in Queens, not only to deal with the quality of life issues themselves, but also to deal with the rising tide of violence, including shootings and robberies and felony assaults. And the robberies and the felony assaults are really spiking in Queens, especially in precincts like the 109, in largely Flushing. So what I'm going to do to get quality of life back, we're looking at crimes. When I say quality of life, the street level drug dealing, where they're selling drugs laced with fentanyl, and overdose deaths are spiking, where people are being assaulted on our streets and in our subways, where people are being subject to individuals who are engaging in aggressive panhandling, where property is being defaced, retail theft. That's all in the bucket of quality of life. So I'm going to create a Community Responsiveness Bureau, CRB. I'm going to have a bureau chief reporting directly to me. And what we're going to do with that, we're going to create community action boards, and we're going to divide Queens into 5 zones: Northeast Queens, Northwest Queens, Southeast Queens, Southwest Queens, and the Rockaways. And I'm going to then go into those zones with my bureau chief. And I'm going to involve from the community, I'm going to involve clergy. I'm going to involve civics. I'm going to involve people from the business community, among others. I'm going to bring in the NYPD. I'm going to bring in the borough commander, whether it's Queens North or Queens South, and the pertinent precinct commander. And we're going to show people on the community action board, they're going to get what they call like a ComStat, a real life NYPD style presentation with the map of the precinct involved, of the area involved. And people will see clearly where the crimes are being committed, what the frequencies are. And then it's going to be like a town hall meeting that I'm going to lead. And then working with the community and the police department in partnership, we will prioritize those quality of life offenses that need to be pursued in those communities. We will do it arm in arm, hand in hand. And I'll take responsibility for that as district attorney. When we do that, I will be zoned like a laser beam on recidivists. It's one thing, people talk about, shoplifting.
You've got to wrap it up.
Okay. So we will focus like a laser beam on people who are recidivists, people who don't come to court, and people who are impervious to being held responsible by the criminal justice system. Other people who may have problems will look to off-ramp them. Thank you. I got a lot going on there. I appreciate it.
I know you do.
Thank you.
Devian?
Yes, thank you. What I would do with respect to those are, I believe that we should be proactive and where we should address quality of life issues as a community. And what I mean by that is that, many quality of life crimes are committed because of poverty. And what I mean by that is that there are some people who think that if they sold, $100 worth of drugs, that means that that's the way to earn income. And I think it's really important that that we not only, if it's because of poverty, I think that we should create programs to help people who need help in that area. And what I mean is first-time offenders, non-violent offenders should be allowed to have an alternative to incarceration. I think that we should create a lot of programs to help address people's issues. That's really important because in Queens, we cannot incarcerate every single person who commits a quality of life crime. When we incarcerate somebody who fare evades, we're spending a lot of money in giving the police officer who arrests them overtime. But when they go to court and they have to get a free lawyer from the government, that's going to be, extra money from the government. And if we do that for every single person who does every single quality of life crime, it's unsustainable. And so I believe that those cases could be addressed properly by when I was younger as a new lawyer, I worked for the MTA as an arbitrator, and at the MTA there were many people who got quality of life tickets for jumping the turnstile, for opening the gate at the train stations, and they got tickets where they would have to pay $100 for not paying the $275 fee. And I believe that could be one structure going forward where people and I think that that's a good structure because people will feel it in their wallets and they will try to do the right thing. In addition, I believe that that we're not safe if we lock every single person up who does the quality of life crimes. Many of those people aren't committing violent crime that impact safety in the community. And I believe that we believe, and I believe that we can work on that. And sometimes locking somebody up for $500,000 a year or $550,000 a year is expensive compared to having a program that might be $200 or $2,000 for that same individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Devian. The next question is for you.
I had my hand up. I thought you said you could put your hand up if you had a rebuttal issue or something like that.
Right, go ahead, George.
Okay, so very quickly, I just want to be clear on something. Devian, made the point that you don't want to lock up people and put them in jail for quality of life offenses. I want to be crystal clear on this. My quality of life plan is not an incarceration plan. It's an accountability plan. And that's why I was leaning heavily into recidivism with my last answer. The idea is to use the leverage of the district attorney's office and the court and the criminal justice system, in fact, have substance use issues, have housing issues. Use the leverage of the court to get them in a better place in their life. At all costs, do everything you can to avoid sending them to Rikers Island. But if they're impervious to help and they keep committing the same crimes and even escalating, only as a last resort would jail be used. My experience in the past with Commissioner Brannon on this, when I helped devise the first quality of life plan, this type of planning does for the MYP done impact on reducing everything from assaults, and it also has consistently put us in a position to reduce both the Rikers jail population and the state prison population. So that's the essence of what I want to do, and I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, George. Devian, you want to say anything more, or shall I move to the next question?
I would just add that, as a society, we can build Queens better if we find ways to help people to be more productive and to find legal means of earning income. And I think that the DA's office should play a crucial role in that, in either using the bully pulpit to make sure that all the other politicians fund programs like that, or the DA's office using their discretionary fund to also address these issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next question is for you, Devian. How will you ensure that the Queens District Attorney's Office is accountable to the people of Queens? Like, how will you work with the community?
Thank you. Well, one of the first things I want to do when I become the DA is to publish all the statistics of the status of the court and of sentences and of cases in court. And what I mean by that is that all the data related to what the conviction rates are like, what the race is of each person who's being convicted, and comparing sentences among the races. I think that's important because I believe that there's a lot of inequity, but we cannot address it unless we know where we are so that we can know how to go forward. In addition, with respect to accountability, I do believe that the DA's office should have more than one office and not just on Queens Boulevard. I believe that Queens is such a gigantic county. It's It has more people than many states. And I believe that we should have satellite offices in other parts of the borough. I also believe that the DA's office can be more accountable by acknowledging to the public when there's prosecutorial misconduct and stating the reasons why certain actions are being taken and why they're not taken. And that's important because in the current DA administration, there's a gigantic problem, which is that there are lawyers who work in that office who discriminated against jurors that were Black, jurors that were Italians, and a white swath of jurors. And that's really important for the criminal justice system because jurors follow a court citation and they come to court to do jury duty. They're regular citizens. They may own homes in Queens, or they may just be a renter in Queens. But when they come to do public service and their civic duty by serving jury duty, they do not expect a lawyer paid by the government is going to strategize on ways to get rid of them. And among the people who were discriminated against were Black jurors. And, you know, when I read the articles about this, it was reminiscent of Mississippi in the early 1900s when Black people were treated unfairly in the court system. And I believe accountability, the first step in accountability is to make sure that the DA's office is free of lawyers who are doing the wrong things. And I believe that one thing that I would do is I would ask all the lawyers who participated in that scheme for their resignation. And I think that's important because anybody who does a trial in Queens should know that when they come to court, the DA's office is going to act with integrity and fairness, and they're not going to try to cheat to win. And I think that's an important signal to the entire community. The DA is the guardian of justice in Queens. And if the DA's office is...
Devian, I've got to get you to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Yes. And if the DA's office is doing the wrong thing, then nobody will have faith in the criminal justice system. And that's really important to me and to many voters in Queens.
Thank you. Thank you for that. George, over to you.
Yes. Well, I'm in my 44th year as a criminal justice professional, and from my time in the police department through my time as a judge, I have a record of being a real believer in transparency and inclusiveness. So inherent in what I was discussing with you at some length just a little while ago, in terms of my quality of life planning, the community action board that I'm discussing would be a very novel approach, not only in Queens, not only in New York City, but I believe nationally. In an elected district attorney, you know, assertively bringing in the community in partnership to help the district attorney decide what types of cases to prioritize, and keeping that community action board process open, which I will do throughout my tenure, and I will build on that in other areas. I also obviously believe in transparency with respect to conviction integrity, and also with victims. Another thing I have on my website is leaning into support of victims. What has been happening in Queens, and this has been reported to me directly by many victims of crimes and victim advocacy groups who have supported my campaign, that the Conviction Integrity Unit, I have one particularly galling matter, that they were moving to dismiss a matter on a homicide. And the mother of the individual, I believe, lived in North Carolina and claims that she wasn't notified until like a day or so before the hearing to dismiss the case, had no knowledge to wrap her head around what was going on with the case and ability to actually be in the courtroom. I mean, that's a glaring example of total and really, unjustifiable lack of transparency by the district. It's kind of like a culture of arrogance almost, which comes from the top down, the incumbent district attorney. So those are the kinds of things on the one hand that I would reverse, and on the other hand that I would implement.
Thank you, George. Serena?
Thank you. So George, you can answer this first. How will you ensure that people with mental health and substance abuse issues are diverted to life-saving programs rather than facing lengthy prison sentences?
So tonight, these questions are kind of like zoning right in on my greatest hits and my top priorities. So once again, I refer you, which you've probably already done, and anyone watching this tonight, back to my website and back to my platform. And along with victims, which I just discussed, along with quality of life, which I've just discussed, they will see, anyone who looks at it will see that I will create a mental health bureau in the Queens District Attorney's Office, a bureau, okay? I don't think that there's any other district attorney's office in New York City that has a bureau. And again, there will be a bureau chief reporting to me. That bureau chief and all of the assigned assistants and all of the paralegal staff will get substantial training in mental health issues. What we will do through our mental health bureau under my leadership is we will look at not only look at new cases coming in, but look at the existing inventory of cases in the district attorney's office to try and see what cases we have pending felony cases in Supreme Court, where an individual appears to have some mental health issues that could be significantly impact not only on the crime the individual has alleged to have committed, but potentially a pattern of criminal or antisocial behavior. And then and just to be clear, I'm not talking about the level of mental illness that would be needed to actually dismiss a case. That's very high level, and that would only apply to a very minuscule number of cases. This is just digging in deep. So now who's a homeless individual and who's on the subway and is, say, accused of assaulting an individual, take a hard look. Now maybe that individual is in jail and that individual has bail. That individual is assessed to, say, let's say, be schizophrenic, also have substance use. That may be the kind of case that our assistants would delve into and try and see, can we line this individual up with appropriate services, be they inpatient, outpatients, so we have a wonderful service provider network in New York City, and use the strong leverage of the court and the district attorney's office, working in partnership with the defense, obviously, and with the court. Queens happens to have an excellent mental health judge, Judge Hirsch, who I know from when I supervised her as the administrative judge. Judges like Judge Hirsch, and get this matter in front of the judge and see if we could use the leverage of that particular case in the individual's record to get them on a path, if not to recovery, outright recovery, but at least to a place where they could live a decent life and not be a threat to themselves or others. That would be the task of the Mental Health Bureau. And the whole plan, among other things, would be to minimize the use of Rikers Island. And I think that this type of a strategy is not only humane for the individuals charged, but is also another key pillar of my plan to enhance and dramatically increase public safety in Queens in a humane and empathetic way. Thank you.
Thank you. And Devian?
Yes, I believe that we should treat addiction as a medical issue and substance abuse also as a medical issue. And I believe that at arraignments, people should be evaluated to see where they are and to see whether or not they should, whether a mental health or a substance abuse plan should be what should be involved with them. Many people who use the criminal court system are victims of trauma or have experienced trauma themselves. And I think that getting them evaluated at arraignments, their first contact with the court system is really important so that we could see where they are and also to see what their needs may be. And I believe that we need to there are lots of programs that are available publicly or privately for people with insurance and without insurance that address inpatient and outpatient services for both mental health and for substance abuse addictions. And I believe that some of those should be employed. In addition, the DA's office should assess the programs that they have to see whether or not they're working or whether they're effective, and then make changes based on that. So I believe that the DA's office, it's really important that people's underlying issues are addressed, because as I stated before, regardless of their contact with the criminal court system, if their underlying issues aren't addressed and treated, they may be back before the court sooner than later. And that is not a good use of limited, scarce court resources.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next question is for you, Devian. What would it take for you to investigate a possible wrongful conviction? And how would you prevent wrongful convictions from happening in the first place?
All right. So I believe that wrongful convictions, well, a big source of them are when the DA quickly files charges without adequate evidence. And that's really important. I don't think that justice means the lack of injustice. And as the DA, I think it's really important for the DA to stop injustices before they happen. It's not enough to 20 years later say, oops, we're sorry, forgive us, here's a check for your suffering. So I believe that the DA's office needs to be transparent with discovery and all the evidence that they have in a case. There's no reason why evidence should be hidden or held back from the defense. This is, and I believe that even perhaps at arraignment, all the police reports that a police officer generated that the office uses to file charges should be handed over to the defense attorney. There's no reason why those things should be hidden or, time should be used to delay it. And so and I also believe any conviction review office should be fully staffed. The current conviction review office has written letters to people who they are aware are innocent of their crimes, and they have written them letters 2 years ago telling them that they're too busy working with people who are in prison, and as a result, they cannot work with somebody who's out of prison at that moment. And it's 2 years later, and they still haven't addressed those people's issues. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that justice delayed is justice denied. And I believe that we're doing a gigantic disservice to people who were wrongfully incarcerated and wrongfully convicted if we don't work expeditiously to root out wrongful convictions, especially when they're apparent. People suffer from collateral consequences when they have a criminal conviction. And if that conviction is improper or was made in error or was made because of bias, then the Queens District Attorney's Office has a duty to fix that as soon as possible.
Thank you, Devian. George?
Well, I want to start off the answer to this question by giving credit where credit is due. Where I felt, obviously, throughout this particular debate and conversation, that it was appropriate and just for me to be critical of the leadership of the incumbent district attorney, Melinda Katz. I've done it. But I want to start the answer to this question to give her credit. I mean, she did create the first conviction integrity unit in the history of Queens County. She deserves credit for that, and I want to acknowledge that straight up, so I'm intellectually honest. Having said that, I, like Devian was just saying, I am aware that there are criticisms floating around about how robust the unit is, whether the unit is properly staffed and properly managed. I'd have to get in there, and I intend to get in there as when I'm elected district attorney. And what I will do with that unit, as I will do with the entire office, I'm going to do an MRI on the whole office. I'm going to take a fresh look at everything. But I think, conviction integrity unit, that's something that its time has come. And I think every district attorney's office in the country should have one. Now, the best way to handle this, of course, as district attorney, is to take every effort possible to see that going forward, from the time I walk in the door, that we don't get convictions that would be subject to being overturned down the road. And what we need there to do that, we need leadership, we need training, and we need accountability. So leadership, I will set the tone. I used to run the department advocate's office, the internal disciplinary prosecution office of the NYPD. I ran that for over 5 years. That kind of like internal DA's office. And I was the boss of close to 20 lawyers dealing with some very serious cases involving police officers. My policy always was, if in doubt, turn it over, in terms of discovery. And I mentioned discovery earlier, and if we're going to get into that a little bit more, but my thing with discovery is, if in doubt, turn things over. So I have no problem with large amounts of discovery being required to be turned over to the defense. I just have a problem with some of the timeframes and requirement of dismissal as the first option for a judge. If the timeframes are met. So discovery is very crucial. So in terms of leadership, the ethos of the office is, this isn't a game. It's not about winning or losing cases. It's about justice. Sometimes justice is a conviction. Sometimes justice is an acquittal or a dismissal. Then we've got training. Obviously, all district attorneys need to be trained. And they have very, very hard and difficult jobs. Everything from discovery to ethics to doing the job right. I will invest very heavily in training. I've always done so. I end with accountability, and I go back to my time in the NYPD. I have a track record of holding police officers accountable, and I personally prosecuted some of the worst corruption cases in the history of the NYPD, and officers were fired based on my prosecution personally or my leadership overseeing other prosecutions. That's always a last option. We don't want to be firing people. We don't want people losing their law licenses. But just to finish, people need to know if they don't do the job consistent with the training and the ethos of their leadership, they will face accountability up to including possible dismissal. That's always been my style. It will continue to be my style when I'm elected district attorney. And I think it will minimize, if not eliminate, wrongful convictions under my watch.
Thank you.
Okay, and for the next question, George, you can start with this. Many people talk about the disparity of Black and Brown people being prosecuted and or incarcerated in comparison to maybe whites and Asians. Now, how would you address this hate crime issues?
Well, is that a hate crime issue? I'm kind of a little bit confused with the way you ended the question. I got the first part of the questions about disparity in prosecutions, but then you threw in hate crime. So I'm not quite sure. You've got to kind of reframe that question for me.
You're right. When we can
Did you combine questions?
I'm sorry?
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. I think you combined two questions there.
Yeah, and the question would be like, what would you do to address hate crimes? We can
I
probably
don't hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Hate crimes.
Yes.
So hate crimes. Now you're breaking up, but I understand the question now to be directly, what will I do to address hate crimes? Right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I will maintain and probably enhance the hate crimes bureau that the district attorney has, the hate crimes initiatives. I will make it clear that hate, especially in a county as richly diverse as Queens, we have no tolerance for individuals subject of crimes based on their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that. Not tolerable, will be highly prioritized under my leadership. But there's another aspect in my program that I think will directly confront in a way where we can potentially reduce the incidence of hate crimes, which is my focus on mental health. I don't believe all hate crimes are driven by mental health, but I think some substantial percentage of them are, where we have deranged, emotionally disturbed individuals, sometimes correlating with substance use, sometimes correlating with housing issues. And for whatever reason, whether it's in the subway or on the street, they focus on an individual of a certain race, ethnicity, or a perception of a sexual orientation, and they engage in a grievous attack. So the Mental Health Bureau concept that I have is to try and find these people when they're in the system, whether it's already for a hate crime or for another type of crime, and to off-ramp them to the type of treatment that will make it less likely to engage in such abhorrent behavior. So that's one aspect, understanding that mental health is a major problem in Queens. People who are acting out with mental health issues and hurting other people, sometimes with hate crimes, is a major issue and needs to be assertively addressed. Also, I will get the word out, where individuals commit these crimes and they're found guilty, they will face a very harsh reality in the district attorney that I'm leading. So on the one hand, we try and get to the bottom of an issue where we can and get people on a better track. On the other hand, if people wantonly committing these crimes under my watch, they should put on their seatbelt and get ready for a jail term.
Thank you, George. Devian, do you want to answer that now?
Yes, thank you. I believe that with respect to hate crimes or any crimes, we need to investigate those crimes thoroughly. We need to help the crime survivor by giving them whatever resources they need to survive. We need to get their input in the prosecution of those cases. And we also need to get the police and we have to insist that the police give good evidence so that we could have a solid prosecution. There's a situation in Queens where 50% of cases are being dismissed. 50% means that half of the cases that are filed are being dismissed. And that's a disservice to crime victims, including hate crime victims. And as a DA, I believe that we should not file charges unless we have evidence and we have the right person, so that we don't, so that victims aren't in limbo where they think they have a case and then at the end it's being dismissed. So I think that we need to treat hate crime survivors with respect. We need to, the DA's office has to be competent and file charges that where they have the evidence. And those are things that I would do as a DA in Queens.
Thank you. Serena?
All right, so now we'll move on to the second round, which will consist of questions from the chat. This time we'll ask the candidates to provide a 1-minute response to each question, and each will have a minute for rebuttal. So for the first question, we'll go with George. The question was, what is your assessment of Melinda Katz, and why do you believe you would make a better DA? And will you support her if you do not win the primary?
Okay, so number one, I think she's doing a poor job running the office. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be running against her. So I mentioned before the serious increases in crime throughout Queens. Queens North over the past 2 years up over 37% with major index felony, major index crime. Queens North up over 60%. So I think she's failed there. She doesn't even acknowledge the crime problem. She accuses me of cherry picking when I pointed out those are some pretty big cherries when we're talking about major felony index crime being up to those degrees. Also, I think that there's a severe lack of competency with respect to her leadership. Queens DA's office has not had a homicide bureau chief for over 2 years. I'll repeat that. No homicide bureau chief for over 2 years. What crime is more serious than homicide? That would be like when I was running the police department with Ray Kelly for 8 years, and I was first step. We didn't have a chief of detectives or a chief of patrol for 2 years. Totally unacceptable. As far as the primary, no, I'm not a supporter if I don't come out on top of the primary, because I've already secured an independent public safety line. I will be on the ballot in November, regardless of what happens in the primary. My plan is the Democrats who voted for me, my real plan is to just win the primary. But if she somehow comes out ahead in the primary, keep the Democrats who already voted for me, and now I can appeal to Republicans and independents and beat her in the general election. So those are the specific answers to your question.
Thank you, George. Devian?
Well, I believe that Ms. Katz is disqualified from continuing to serve as DA for many reasons. Number one, the issue of supporting and defending lawyers who discriminate against jurors is disqualifying, in my opinion. There's no defense for putting the needs of lawyers who did the wrong thing over the public good. As the DA, you are supposed to be the one person in Queens thinking about justice and thinking about how to make Queens more fair and make the criminal court system more fair for everyone who goes there. And if, as the DA, you're protecting people who picked on jurors, not defendants, not anybody else, but innocent jurors, I believe that that is intolerable, and that alone should be disqualifying from every voter in Queens. And in addition, I believe that a DA who has 50% of their cases being dismissed speaks to their lack of competency. There is no law firm in Manhattan or anywhere else in New York State that would have a business model where 50% of the cases that they file are being dismissed by the court. I believe that this is happening because the office is filing charges against people and railroading people, and they're not reviewing evidence to see whether or not they have evidence. And they're hoping that people will just take plea deals, accumulate criminal records, and add to the mass incarceration that's going on in our society. In addition, the fact that, in 2001, I was in an urban politics class in college many years ago. And in that class, we learned that there are 9 neighborhoods in New York City where 70% of the prisoners in upstate New York come from. And I was surprised when I heard that my South Bronx neighborhood was one of those neighborhoods, and my new Jamaica Queens neighborhood was also one of those neighborhoods. We fast forward many years now, and crime.
Devian, I've got to get you to wrap it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And
actually, quickly, would you endorse her or not? If you weren't successful, just quickly.
Well,
yes or no?
I don't believe that we will need to address that issue because I plan to win the primary.
Fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so for the next and probably final question from the audience, would either candidate support or bring back stop, question, and frisk in order to reduce crime? And Devian, you can start with that.
Well, first of all, I believe stop, question, and frisk was a police department policy that the chief of police handled. But nevertheless, we all remember that stop, question, and frisk was applied inappropriately. It was heavily used in minority communities. There were so many young African-American men and women who were subjected to it, and it was not applied evenly. And as a result, it contributed to many people in the community feeling distance from the community, from the police officers, and seeing them as oppressors and not as community people there to protect and serve them. So I would not support stop, question, and frisk if it were to be applied the way it was back in the 90s and early 2000s.
Thank you. And George?
Okay, so there was a bit of a problem you might not be aware of. The premise of the question seems to imply that stop, question, and frisk is no longer used by the NYPD or implied in New York City. Stop, question, and frisk never went away, okay? It's just used now under the auspices of the federal court based upon a settlement in a class action in a major litigation against the NYPD. Stop, question, and frisk in and of itself is a legal concept that if the NYPD or any police officer has reasonable suspicion that someone is or about to be committing a crime, they can be stopped, questioned, and if appropriately frisked. Now the NYPD is under oversight where there's a federal monitor that oversees that and is constantly reviewing the stops and the questions and the frisks that are done for their legality. As someone who was in the NYPD during the time when very high numbers of stop, question, and frisks were being used, I'll say I think it was overused. I will say that straight up. And I think that it needs to be used very judiciously, but it's not something that would be abandoned, because should a police officer have legitimate, reasonable suspicion that someone has a firearm while the officer is questioning them, not to be able to frisk that individual may lead to the officer being shot and killed. So nobody would want that to happen, least of all me, or anyone else for that matter. But it has to be used correctly. It has to be carefully monitored, and we do have to acknowledge it was overused in the past. That's my views on that.
Thank you very much, George. Listen, thank you to the both of you for coming this evening. Got to wrap it up with closing statements. Now, each of you have 2 minutes to speak, and George, if you could go first, please.
Well, once again, I thank Schneps Media for this opportunity. This is what democracy is all about. Unfortunately, I have an opponent, the incumbent district attorney, who is not availing herself of the democratic process. She refuses to go to any forum with me where we could have a debate like back and forth and we could answer the same questions simultaneously and even potentially have an opportunity to ask each other questions. If she's so confident in her positions and in her leadership style and her competency, then show up. What we're looking at here is a cynical campaign. I call it from 30,000 feet. Try and use all of the advantages of the office, all of the press conferences, all of the money that she raises. By the way, she is just, according to recent financial filing, she has taken in $130,000 from the billionaire Steve Cohen and his wife, who are trying to build a casino on Queens Parkland. Why is Steve Cohen so interested in the Queens DA's race? Those are the kinds of questions she's avoiding. I have the record, I have the competence, and I have the courage to lead Queens out of this dilemma that we're in, with significantly raising rises in crime. Flushing is out of control crime-wise. It's straight up, and that's continuing with this year's numbers. Queens needs someone with my leadership style right now, who is not beholden to party bosses, who is not beholden to people like Governor Hochul, who just endorsed Melinda Katz, who refused to deal with the bail issue, with the dangerousness issue, who refused to deal with discovery issues. I have the courage and the ability to get Queens in the right place, and New York City's recovery will start in Queens under my leadership as district attorney. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity.
George, thank you very much. Devian, over to you.
Thank you. And first, I would like to thank Mr. George Grasso for coming to the debate, because if he hadn't come to this debate, we'd probably not have one. And I believe that this debate is important because it is a job interview so that the people of Queens could know what they can expect in the next 4 years. By not having the current DA present here today, voters are missing a crucial bit, and they do not know what they can expect from the current DA. But I believe that I'm running to be the Queens DA because I believe that, we all know that Queens has been around since 1683, and that's 340 years of Queens. There hasn't been diversity in leadership in Queens County's DA's office, and I believe that's important. Blacks are only 13% of Queens, but they're 48% of the defendants in criminal court cases. And studies show that their sentencing and other portions of the criminal justice system, they suffer adversely from those portions of the criminal justice system. And I think it's really important for a district attorney to be concerned about reducing the biases in the court system. It is unfair to people of color and Blacks if the criminal justice system continues to be unfair for another generation. I'm running to be the Queens DA because I believe that we can be smart on crime. We can use data and metrics and programs that are working in other jurisdictions to help reduce crime, to reduce costs to taxpayers, and to keep Queens safe. As a lawyer for almost 17 years right here in Queens, I have all the skills and experience to be the Queens DA. I've handled hundreds of trials in both criminal court and family court, and I understand not just what happens in a courtroom, but outside of the courtroom, and also how it impacts the community. And as the DA, I plan to be fair to everyone, regardless of their race, their skin color, their financial status, their sexual orientation, and religion. And I'm asking Queens County for a chance so that we can be smart on crime, be fair on crime, and reduce biases in the court system while keeping Queens County safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Devian.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. That concludes our Democratic Queens District Attorney debate. Remember that early voting in the primary continues through this Sunday, June 25th, and primary day itself is Tuesday, June 27th. And a note to voters, while the primaries for City Council race will be decided through ranked choice voting, the Queens DA primary will not, because it is a state position. Vote for only one of the candidates on the ballot in the Queens DA race, or feel free to write in a candidate of your choosing. Visit the Board of Elections website at vote.nyc to find your polling site and local polling place. And remember that every election, large or small, is an important one, so please vote. Thank you for watching and have a great evening.